Since Phoebus displayed his heroic spirit, Esmeralda became irretrievably enamored with this handsome officer. At just 16 years old, she was incredibly naive. Through the voice of the down-and-out poet, Hugo described her. Esmeralda was an innocent and charming girl. She was passionately naive, understanding nothing and yet eager about everything. She couldn't even tell the difference between men and women, not even in her dreams. She was the kind who loved dancing and revelry, who thrived on fresh air like a queen bee with invisible wings, living in perpetual whirls, as this perpetually vibrant girl wholeheartedly loved the handsome officer Phoebus. She had no idea that this was the beginning of a tragic fate. This man is a complete playboy. He has been engaged to a noble lady, but he still goes around looking for women. Seeing that this beauty was in love with him, how could he let go of the duck that flew into the pot? So he decided to date this girl and possess her. Claude found out about this, so he followed Phoebus all the way to their date at the inn. Just when Esmeralda was about to surrender herself entirely, to dedicate herself to love, that furious Claude could no longer contain himself. He rushed out and, with a pre-prepared dagger, stabbed Phoebus. Poor Esmeralda was so frightened by this scene that she fainted. Claude took this opportunity to flee. When people arrived at the scene, they believed Esmeralda had killed Phoebus and she was arrested. During her trial, she endured a ridiculous spectacle, a vivid reflection of the dark judicial system of the Bourbon dynasty in which Hugo lived. Let's examine one of the absurd and ludicrous scenes. Esmeralda was brought in for questioning, alongside her innocent little goat. The prosecutor of the Royal Religious Court picked up the girl's hand drum from the table, lifted it up in a particular manner in front of the goat, and asked, "What time is it now?" The goat, with its clever eyes, looked at her, lifted its golden hooves, and tapped 7 times. It was exactly 7 o'clock at that moment. Then the onlookers generally showed expressions of fear. How could a goat be so clever? It must be a demon. And worse yet, when the prosecutor shook the movable letters inside a small pouch on the table, people saw the goat use its hoof to arrange the letters into a name, Phoebus. Everyone was shocked again. Does the goat have wisdom? Of course not. It was just Esmeralda's way of expressing her admiration for her beloved. But now, in the eyes of bystanders, it was clear evidence of sorcery. So Esmeralda was sentenced to death by hanging. On the day before she was to be hanged, Claude went to her cell and confessed everything to Esmeralda. He told her how he had fallen madly in love with her, how he had killed Phoebus, and said that as long as she was willing to be with him, he could help her escape, and they could run away together, far and free, sparing her from the gallows. Claude even crawled to Esmeralda's feet, begging without any dignity, saying, "If you have any compassion, I beg you not to reject me. Show some mercy. If you came from hell, then I will go back with you. Everything I have done is for this. Your gaze is more lovely than God's." As soon as she heard these cheesy words from the priest, it was clear how mad he had become. However, what did Esmeralda think? This was a madman who had killed her lover, so besides fear and extreme hatred, she couldn't possibly feel anything else. So Esmeralda rejected the priest, insulting and cursing him. Claude was completely despairing. He decided, if I can't have her, then no one else will either. Let her die. According to the law, Esmeralda had to go before the priest for her final confession before being executed by hanging. The priest who was to hear her confession was none other than Claude. So, in the square in front of the church, Claude stood there sanctimoniously, seizing the opportunity to approach Esmeralda once more, begging her to flee with him. "If you don't leave, you're doomed." But he was rejected once again. Thus, Claude loudly pronounced Esmeralda's fate, ordering the executioner to take her away to be hanged. After making this decision, Claude was also in despair. He couldn't bear to watch what was about to happen, so he fled alone. Claude alternated between agony and jealousy, imagining a life together with Esmeralda, imagining tender intoxication. Then he would think of the noose tightening around her fair neck, strangling her, and this would cause him to break down in pain. So Claude ran uncontrollably until dusk. He wanted to escape nature, life, himself, humanity, even God. It was a process of collapse. Here, Hugo's depiction of despair is deeply penetrating. Love is merely a common spark, whereas despair, for whatever reason, carries philosophical significance. However, psychologically and philosophically speaking, escape is futile. Whether facing immense pain, despair, or joy, the only way forward is to confront it directly. What happened to Esmeralda in the end. Just as soldiers were preparing to put Esmeralda back into the prisoner's cart and send her to the gallows, this woman actually saw, standing on the corner balcony of the square, a person. Who was it? It was Phoebus. Yes, Phoebus was actually alive. Esmeralda's heart filled with excitement and joy at seeing the young officer she loved was still alive. But unfortunately, although her lover hadn't died, Phoebus didn't step forward to clear Esmeralda's name. The terrifying gallows still awaited Esmeralda. It was clear that this officer didn't truly care about Esmeralda at all. At that moment, Quasimodo appeared. As the executioner prepared to carry out the order, the peculiar Quasimodo suddenly leapt over the railing in front of the building, using his hands, feet, and knees to grasp the rope. People then saw him descend like water dripping down glass, sliding along the wall in front as though leaping from a rooftop like a cat. He swiftly ran towards the two assistants, knocking them down with his enormous fists, and lifted the gypsy girl as one would a doll, then swiftly disappeared into the church. The bell ringer raised the girl high above his head, shouting in a terrifying voice, "God, God," and the people echoed, shouting the same, clapping their hands joyously. Quasimodo's single eye gleamed proudly in that moment. What had happened? At that time, there was a law stating that even criminals condemned to death were protected once inside a church, deemed inviolable under divine sanctuary. Without a doubt, Quasimodo had acted heroically, rescuing his beloved and defying the grip of justice. He felt immensely proud. Thus, with the power of God, Quasimodo shattered the authority of those officers, judges, executioners, and the king himself. And so, Quasimodo took Esmeralda away, settling her in a small room beside the tower, providing her with clothes, food, and bedding. Esmeralda lived in the church, deeply moved yet still wary of Quasimodo. When she slept, Quasimodo watched over her secretly, guarding her door. When she woke, he silently withdrew to remain unseen, humble in his devotion to the woman he loved. Esmeralda couldn't help but feel moved by his actions. She pulled Quasimodo close to her, looking upon him with sympathy for his many flaws. Poor Quasimodo said, "I have never understood my ugliness as clearly as I do now. When I compare myself to you, I pity myself greatly, for I am a pitiful, unfortunate monster. And you? You are sunlight, a dewdrop, a bird's song. And I am a terrible creature, neither man nor beast. Something more rough, ugly, and misshapen than the stones beneath my feet." And he laughed, the saddest laughter in the world. One day, Esmeralda saw Phoebus on the square from the rooftop. Overjoyed yet pained, she reached out to the square, tears streaming down, calling out Phoebus's name. Though deaf, Quasimodo understood everything and suffered deeply, knowing her heart belonged elsewhere. From that day on, he never appeared before Esmeralda again. Everyone wonders, if Phoebus hadn't died, wouldn't Esmeralda's murder charge have collapsed on its own? Why couldn't she regain her freedom? Yes, because Phoebus did nothing to help Esmeralda clear her name.